The Scarborough Public Library acknowledges that it is located in the traditional homeland, past and present, of tribes in the Wabanaki Confederacy. We recognize and honor the current tribes who comprise the Confederacy: the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy, the Maliseets, and the Micmac, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We acknowledge the Owaskoag people who once lived in what is now Scarborough. We respect the traditional values of these tribes and support their efforts for land and water protection and restoration. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences.
Thank you. So now I'll turn it over to Kate Kearns, who's the president of the Friends of the Library.
Good evening, and hello to our Zoom audience. I'm Kate Kearns, I'm president of the Friends, and I sleep under the tables out there, I will say every time. The Emerson Lecture series is actually in honor of a gentleman named Fred Emerson, who lived in Scarborough. He was an engineer, a businessman, an entrepreneur, a library friend, and he valued the library's mission of offering lifelong learning to the whole community. He left the Friends a bequest when he passed away to support the future library expansion, yay library expansion, and to spread knowledge about STEM topics that he was passionate about. So the Friends use his bequest to fund this Emerson Lecture series in his honor. It focuses on new ideas in business, science, technology, and engineering. Tonight, we are welcoming Chelsea Conaboy, author of Mother Brain. Our next lecturer is in March. You'll recognize this name too. It will be Rhett Talbot, co-author of Chasing Shadows, My Life Tracking the Great White Shark. Rhett is a journalist who worked with a renowned shark biologist to tell the story of great white sharks and its return to the East Coast. So that'll be an interesting talk. That is on March 19th at 6 o'clock. All right, now I'd love to introduce Chelsea Conaboy, author of Mother Brain. This is her book. Abby's borrowing it after me, but if anyone here wants to borrow it after her, you're welcome to it. I met Chelsea at a writer's retreat for the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance. She was teaching the nonfiction group, and I was a workshop member on the poetry side. We were together for a long weekend in a lovely inn, so she was at my mercy. And she graciously agreed to come speak to us today. Chelsea is a health and science journalist. Her writing has been published by the New York Times, Mother Jones, Politico, Boston Sunday Globe magazine, and many more. Her first book, Mother Brain, weaves her own story of new parenthood with the latest neuroscience and social psychology together with new reporting, revealing unexpected upsides, generations of scientific neglect, and a powerful new narrative of parenthood. So welcome, Chelsea.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you to Kate for that introduction, and to Catherine and Tom for being the technological wizard. And thank you to all of you for being here. I know it is really hard to come out to an evening event in Maine in the winter, and especially in a week where there have been snow days and ice delays and sick days, and it was hard for me to get here, so I appreciate you all being here as well. So as Kate said, first I just want to say I'm going to talk for a little while, but my very favorite part of these events is the conversation we can have afterwards. So I hope you'll ask some questions. I spent most of my career as a newspaper journalist. I was a reporter at the Boston Globe and the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Press Herald. I was an editor of the Press Herald where in 2015, when my first son was born, and I was really ready for him. You know, he was planned and wanted, and we went to all of the education classes and did all the things we were supposed to do. And still, when he arrived, I was just really overwhelmed, especially with worry about him. He was small, and There he is right there. He was very tiny and also worry about me and my own capacity to take care of him. And because I had experience as a healthcare journalist, I just took a deep dive into the science to try to find something that could help me to understand what I was experiencing, because my feelings of overwhelm and a sense that something had changed in me, maybe forever, wasn't really reflected in the baby books that I was reading. And so I found some answers in that science, and I ended up writing a story for the Boston Globe Sunday magazine about my own experience of new motherhood and what I had learned so far about the maternal brain. And it went seriously viral. It was one of their most read stories of the year. And it really showed me that a lot of people were feeling like me, and maybe a lot of people needed the science as much as I did. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is a little bit about what the science tells us, and then what we can do with it. So I'm sure you'll recognize this place. It is the Scarborough Marsh, and just as I was just beginning the reporting for this book, my husband who's a filmmaker, had just become licensed to be a drone pilot, and he had gone out and taken some video of the marsh. It was very beautiful. This is a still from it. And a few weeks later, I was standing in an fMRI lab at Yale School of Medicine, watching some researchers scan the brains of mothers. They were looking in particular at mothers and addiction to nicotine in particular. And as I watched the kind of waves of different cross sections of the brain move across their screen, I kept thinking about the video of the drone flying over the marsh, and it ended up being this really beautiful metaphor for me for the brain, because the brain is something that we used to think of as fixed and unchangeable. It used to be considered a non-renewable organ, like your skin changes, the cells like circulate in other parts of your body, but that your brain kind of remains the same, at least after adolescence. And now we know that that's not the case, that the brain is always changing, that it remains plastic through the rest of your life. And so that's a lot like the marsh, when there's a rain or a drought, or a change in seasons, there's a shift in the nutrients and the makeup of the species in any given part of the marsh. And when a storm comes, like happened recently, multiple times over, it's really a time of major upheaval for the marsh. The whole cliff edge can fall off, everything gets flooded and moved around, and pregnancy is a storm. That is what it is for the brain. One of the very first papers that I ever read about the parental brain talked about the endocrine tsunami that comes with pregnancy. And it's not like a regular storm, it's like a 100-year storm. We talk so much about the hormonal fluctuations that happen in pregnancy, how if you've ever been pregnant, especially in recent years, you've probably learned about, your progesterone and estrogen skyrocket, and then they plummet really fast around childbirth, and there's a surge of oxytocin and prolactin and all of these things that are meant to keep a pregnancy going, to help a fetus to develop and help your body, your bones change and your blood flow change and all of the things that are needed to sustain a baby and then to birth them. We don't talk all that much about what all of those hormones mean for the brain. And it's really considerable. The research that we have to date really tells the story about how those hormones prime the brain to be changed by our babies. They really make it more plastic, maybe more plastic and moldable than it's been at any other time. or will be at any other time in your adult life. And then your baby arrives, and they are this incredible stimulus for the brain. And we know this. We know that adults, pregnant or not, male or female, whatever, it is the cries of babies, the laughs of babies, the structure of their face call our attention. And when your brain has been primed to give that attention, something really interesting happens. So this first quote here is from a group of, this is from that very first paper that I ever read about the parental brain, and by Jody Paluski, Kelly Lambert, and Craig Kinsley, who really have been leaders in this field. And they say that pregnancy is a developmental epoch as significant as puberty. It sets into motion a series of events ranging from long-lasting neuronal structure change to neurogenesis to wholesale remodeling of synapses and neural activity. What that means is that every level, the brain is changed. The activity, the structure, the connection, all of those things are changed in pregnancy. And the second quote is from one of our most wisest observers of human behavior, Mary Oliver. Attention is the beginning of devotion. So what researchers have found is that in the early postpartum period, brain regions that are involved in motivation and vigilance and meaning making, all of those are really highly active. They're highly activated by babies. And so we are prone to pay close attention and to try to meet their needs, to try to meet our baby's needs, even when we have no real skills in doing that, to go back again and again. And the way I see it, that this really has two roles. One, our babies, the first one is survival, right? If we don't try over and over again to meet our baby's needs, they're depending on us for everything, right? So it is to keep them alive. And then second, it is to learn. Parenting requires a whole set of skills that we may or may not have before we become pregnant. And this process of capturing our attention helps us to learn more quickly. And how do we, first I just want to say, so what helps us to learn more quickly is how to read our baby's cues, how to recognize what their needs are, and then how to respond to them and to do it accurately, right? To become better at predicting what they need from moment to moment, even as they're constantly changing. And so there are, the research shows that over time, this intensity of attention shifts, and what develops is a fine tuning in our social cognition, our ability to read and respond to someone else's mental states and emotions. We get better at it. And we get better at regulating our own emotions in the meantime, which is not to say that's easy for anyone who is taking care of a toddler will know that that's quite challenging, but we get better at it because our predictions become more accurate over time. What researchers have documented with that kind of later postpartum time is changes in both the activity and the structure of brain regions that make up what's called the theory of mind network. So that those brain regions that are involved with reading cues from another person, reflecting them back in ourselves, and then predicting what they mean. There's also changes in what's called the default mode network, which is a group of brain regions that are involved in reading our own cues, right? Like the cues from our bodies to understand what we need, and also to create the narrative of ourselves, of how we think of ourselves as a whole person. And one of researcher, her name is Winnie Orchard, she's based in Australia, and she told me something that I think about all the time, which is that in New Parenthood, those changes in both the theory of mind and default mode network may come together to basically extend yourself a little further. Meaning all of the brain systems that you use to keep yourself, to know yourself, kind of encompass your child, because they need it. They need us to know them in order to help them to survive and to grow and to develop. So how do we know all of this? What you won't see in these slides is like a perfect map of the maternal brain, because it doesn't really exist yet. What we have in parents are really like snapshots, moments of time. You know, that mother who was in the MRI scanner, they were looking at like particular kinds of activities and particular regions, but how does that relate to her behavior with her child out in the world? So we have all of these snapshots from humans, but that builds on 70 years of research in animals, which, you know, in animals you can manipulate the experiments much more. You can actually change the course of their pregnancy, the hormones that they might be receiving or not. You can look at their brain at particular moments along that pregnancy and literally like count their neurons in the postpartum period. And so there's some really interesting research that's coming out of animals. This is just to show you like a snapshot. The research is so complicated that this is actually just like obviously like an animated graphic of illustrated graphic to show that what researchers have found is in a brain region called the medial preoptic area. It's sort of like the radio receiver of the body. It takes in all of the signals from all of the systems in your body and translates them into action. And in mice, what they found is that estrogen and progesterone change the activity of this particular kind of neuron called galanin neurons. And it increases the activity of some, it silences others, and it creates new synaptic connections. Why this matters is it's like kind of the origin story of the changes that happen in the brain. There's this hormonal tsunami. It changes the radio signal in the brain, and that sets off a cascade of other changes. I love this research partly because, for one thing, we can't study the MPOA, the medial preoptic area, in humans. It's too small to be imaged. And so it's like a very neat origin story, but also because another group of researchers has found that this pool of galanin neurons is present in males and in females. And in each, it is directly related to parental care. So if in male mice who are parental, who have grown to be parental, if you block out the set of particular neurons, they stop. And I think this is really important because one message in the science is that the parental brain is universal. It is not the maternal brain, it is the parental caregiving brain. And I think this message is so important because we have really dramatically underestimated whose biology can make them into really good caregivers. There are two things that shape the parental brain. One is hormones and the other is experience. So it's the surge of hormones and then the exposure to those babies. And fathers and other non-gestational parents also go through dramatic hormonal changes when they become parents. And they also, if they are committed and spend time with their babies, have that experience of exposure to these powerful change makers which are their babies. I just want to kind of go through like these few other big takeaways. There's so much more to the science. It's really like honestly hard to figure out what pieces to hit, but these are the messages that I think are kind of the pieces of the story that can change how we look at our own experiences with parenthood and hopefully change things on a broader scale. So one is that fathers and non-gestational parents are changed also. Two, it's a two-way street. We talk a lot about how parents are shaping their baby's brains, and we don't really talk that much about how babies are shaping their parents' brain. You adapt to the particular child that you have, who arrives with their own genetics and their own sense of agency, and often their own temperament and ways. And we sort of talk sometimes about parenting and motherhood in particular as if it's like this kind of plug-in, right? This like set of behaviors that one that is kind of uniform across human nature, and two that is automatic. But you grow with your baby in response to your baby. I don't know about all of you, but I have two kids and they're very different. And I feel this when my parenting for my first baby was very different than for the second. And when the second arrived, I adapted in ways that benefited both of them. This is a time, new parenthood in particular, is a time of turmoil for the brain. It comes with powerful adaptation and great vulnerability. And we've come a long way, I think, in making space for that vulnerability. But I think there's much more to do, particularly in recognizing that that's true for every pregnancy, for every experience of new parenthood, not just for those who develop a postpartum mood and anxiety disorder, but for everyone. And yeah. And then lastly, pregnancy and parenthood shapes our long-term health. I had one researcher tell me that reproductive history is like the last frontier in women's health research, or in health research more broadly, that very few studies account for that as a variable, when in reality, particularly for women, the risks of immune conditions and cognitive conditions are greatly affected by your reproductive history. So we don't have that information yet, really, like we don't understand it at the degree to which that's true, because no one's looking. I'm happy to talk more about that if people are interested. So what do we do with this science? I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is just that this is pregnancy is a distinct developmental stage. And if we recognize that to be true, then what do we do with it? What's our responsibility? I want to talk just briefly about the state of pregnancy in the United States. It's pretty bad. We have an astronomically high rate of maternal mortality. These numbers are old. It's actually gotten worse. In 2021, which is the most recent figures we have, the maternal mortality rate was 32.9. This is looking at 42 days after pregnancy, within the window up to 42 days, which is one way of looking at it. Another way, there are kind of two sets of data. This is one. You can see, compared to all of these other countries, we are far and away the worst. Although I will say the numbers in the UK are also climbing in recent years. And there is a huge divide by race. Black women are well over twice. They face a mortality rate that's more than twice what white women face. It's actually like 2.5. if you look at these numbers up to the 1 year postpartum, the picture gets much, much worse. And when you do that, there's been some research in recent years that have taken the up to 1 year and said, well, what are the causes? And the number one cause of those deaths is mental health conditions. It's suicide and substance use. There was just a big study that just came out of Sweden. Sweden has this like amazing national database of health information. They looked at nearly 1 million women in Sweden and found that those who had been diagnosed with perinatal depression experienced a risk of suicidal behavior that was 3 times higher than the general population of new mothers. So we have made so much progress in raising awareness of postpartum mood and anxiety disorders and broadening what that umbrella is to capture the reality of what people experience. But there's so much more to do. And if this is the reality, and we know that so much of it is tied to mental health, then we need to do what we do with all sorts of health conditions, which is to focus on prevention. And that's actually something we can do. We're not doing it, but we can. We know what some of the risk factors are for depression, for perinatal depression and anxiety. They are a history of depression and of abuse, an unwanted or unplanned pregnancy, pregnancy complications, major life stressors, including financial stress. We could screen for those things and connect people with the resources that they need. We don't do that right now. Mostly what we do is wait until people are in crisis and give them a 1-page screening tool, which is not statistically it's effective, but I know a lot of people who have been missed by the Edinburgh screening tool. So there's so much more to do. Another piece is paid leave. So this is a map from the New York Times. It says the US is 1 in 7 countries. It's actually now 1 in 6 countries who have no mandated maternity leave. This is just for mothers. You can see that the countries that have none are in orange, and this little dot there, Papua New Guinea over there, and the rest are almost, they're such small countries that they're hard to find on the map. This is a really specifically American shame. We know that paid leave is linked to positive health outcomes for babies, for parents, to parental financial stability, which is also linked to mental health. We know that it's good for business. We know this from some of the state level studies that have been done. And yet we haven't acted. Maine just passed 12 weeks paid leave program, which is great progress. But you can see we're still pretty far off from what the global norm is. And certainly with what would be considered income-wise our peer nations, 12 weeks is just not enough. It's also not a measure that's grounded in science. We have 12 weeks has become the standard because in the 70s and 80s, they tried for 36 weeks and that got voted down. And they tried for 24 weeks and that got voted down. They tried for 16 weeks and that got voted down. And they settled on 12. There's no biological link to that framework. I've added fathers as well. The world is, there's a lot of work globally to do for paternal leave. But if you look at Europe, Canada, Europe, Australia, Russia, they've all got it and we have none. So there's a lot of work to do at the policy level. These are just 2 examples, 2 big ones. I also feel strongly that there's one thing I don't do in Mother Brain is like give you a bunch of like tips and tricks for how to cope with your own mother brain because I find, one, I'm not a clinician, and two, it is, I think the work is broader than that. I think it's in what we do with, it's in what we do with our policy, and then it's also in what we do, and how we talk about what it means to be a mother or to be a parent. So I spend a lot of time in this book talking about maternal instinct. And I felt, as I learned more and more about the science, I felt angry that I didn't know it already when I was pregnant, that it wasn't more a part of the cultural conversation around parenthood. And I really spent a lot of time thinking about why that was, because at that point there were 20 years of studies in humans and 60 years of studies in animals. And I realized that we have this other narrative, which is that we are endowed with a maternal instinct, which is, when I talk about maternal instinct, I'm talking about the capacity for caregiving that is innate and automatic and distinctly female. And that story, we've been taught to think of it as something that is grounded in science, and it's not. So it comes from early psychologists who took ideas about the morality of motherhood and womanhood and wrote them into scientific theory. William MacDonald was one of those. He wrote that the protection and cherishing of the young is the constant and all-absorbing occupation of the mother, to which she devotes all her energies, and in the course of which she will at any time undergo privation, pain, and death. The instinct becomes more powerful than any other and can override any other, even fear itself. William McDougall also went on to write that a maternal instinct declines in a woman the more education she receives. So he was a racist and a eugenicist, and his interest in codifying the idea of maternal instinct in science was directly linked to his concern about falling birth rate among white Americans. That idea has been carried forward and recast again and again, mostly by white men who have told us what it means to be a mother, despite feminist scholars from the very beginning challenging this idea. One of them is Conrad Lorenz. This is you may recognize this very famous image of him. His work on imprinting, which talked about the lock and key mechanisms of a baby and a mother, and how the shape of those things were predetermined, really shaped John Bowlby's work on attachment. Attachment theory is now really the predominant theory by which we understand and talk about child development. There's a lot of good in attachment theory, and it talks about the mother and the child in space without any consideration of anything around them, right? Fathers and siblings and teachers and grandparents and racism and climate change and the economy, and I could do a whole evening just on that topic. But so an excerpt of my book ran in the New York Times in August of 2020 under this headline: "Maternal instinct is a myth that men created," which I did not write, but I also don't disagree with it. And the story, I received thousands of angry messages. And then it was re-upped again on Twitter when this guy Greg and some other conservative commentators shared it. And Elon Musk commented a couple of times, actually. There was lots of comments about whether or not I was a mother or not. I must be barren, jokes on them. And I'm sharing this to say, there's a lot at stake. Like, there's a reason why people get so angry about this, because the basic political and economic principles in the United States are built on the idea that we've got this, that women have everything they need to be mothers, on the sanctity of the nuclear family and the self-contained nature of it. And I'm not alone in getting these messages. Every single mother writer I know gets them. Our inability to get paid leave or better investment in perinatal care or affordable, accessible childcare, all of those things hinge on the idea that we don't need them, that we've got it. Because we have this maternal instinct which overcomes all else. And there's like a lot of people who say, well, you know, that I'm dead set on erasing women and mothers, or how could I attack motherhood, which is such a beautiful thing. And, or who say, well, a mother's intuition is real. And to that last point, I say, you're right. And there's an incredible story on the science of how it happened that is not, that is fascinating and nuanced. And it's true that motherhood can be a really beautiful thing. And it's also really hard. And it also creates all sorts of vulnerabilities in our lives that we have to recognize and we have to support. So I didn't want them to have the last word. These are just, you know, some reviews for the book, but I'm sharing them here particularly because I wrote the book that I needed to help me understand my own experience of new motherhood. And I've been really encouraged and at just how many people have sort of said that they needed it too. And that is a really beautiful thing and something I'm just so grateful for. So I would love to answer any questions. And we had another baby after our first. Yeah.
I particularly loved this section. There's a short section that focuses on how even the brains of grandparents change, like that instinct and that experience of child care can go out even beyond those generations. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I love this topic. So, you know, what the research shows on the parental brain really, so, you know, the majority of our research is about mothers, right? Cisgender, heterosexual mothers. That's just the reality of it. We do have the set of other research that's growing in fathers and others, but the grandmother research is only mothers. What we see, there's this fascinating set of studies that follows women over time, from before they were pregnant, immediately after their pregnancy, 2 years out, and 6 years out. And what they've documented is significant structural changes in that theory of mind network. And it's still there at 6 years. And as far as the researchers are concerned, they're gonna keep following, but they think it lasts forever. And we know that, that some of it at least lasts forever, because we also have studies in older parents that find differences, in older people that find differences in brain scans between parents and non-parents. Why? Like, why would it keep going past the immediate postpartum, past your childbearing years? Human mothers have always been really important, and they have never been enough. We have always needed support in rearing children, especially if you have more than one. And the human species differentiated itself in evolutionary history from other primates by having babies closer together. And that was only possible because we had support. And one theory called the grandmother hypothesis posits that it was the mothers of the mothers who lived just a little bit longer and were able to pass along their longer living genes to their children, and also increase the reproductive success of their family. And they gave us menopause for one thing, that is how we came to live so far past our childbearing years. And it's only us and the toothed whales. Those are the only species that experience menopause. Toothed whales are also very communal childbearing, very maternal, matricentric societies. So the message there in my mind is like, takes a village, can feel trite, but it's true at a biological level. We need other people, and also this capacity for caregiving that we develop as parents changes not only how we interact with our own babies, but really like with the broader world, with other children in our lives, with other caregivers, and that is a framework for us really for the rest of our lives.
Cool.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So with the grandparenting, that's an interesting question that you asked. What are the actual effects of the changes that happen?
Yeah. So they're subtle, right? But or at least how they can be documented in the brain is subtle, but it has to do with the responsiveness of the studies that we have so far. And this is a just like very emerging part of the research, but they show, they look at like how grandparents respond to their own grandchildren versus other children, and the kind of speed of response to your own children. It basically is about like how tuned in you are to that child's needs, because you are in a caregiving role for them. And your ability goes back to that like sense of predicting, right? So how you get to know them, how you can read their cues and respond to them and predict what they will be next time. It's differences in speed and connectivity in particular areas of the brain that are involved in that process.
We have a question from online is asking, what do you think the gaps are in the research? And then as a follow-up to that, what's the greatest policy change that's needed based on the research?
Gosh, it's hard to pick just one policy change, but I would probably say paid leave. I think it needs to be universal and widespread, and it's so linked to so many other challenges that new parents face, particularly financial security and the stress of dealing with job changes and childcare. It is basic, right? Like 1 in 4 women in the United States go back to work after, I think it's 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I mean, you haven't healed in a basic sense then. So it's really basic and urgent, and we need it. The other question was, what are the gaps in the research? Honestly, there are a lot. I spend a lot of time on that in this book because I think it's really important to not like overstate what we know. There's a lot that we don't know, and I actually think that those gaps are really interesting too, both the reasons for them and the questions that they could lead to. Certainly fathers and other non-gestational parents, it's a huge need for more research there. But also, we don't have enough research on mothers for the sake of themselves. So one of the things that researchers told me again and again is that, I think this is starting to change, but when they would apply for grants to study the maternal brain, they would get responses from funders that said, what about the offspring? And that the avenues for getting this research funded is only really through child outcomes. And that's fine, child outcomes are super important, but so are mothers just as human beings. And so what we have is a lot of research in kind of the very early postpartum period, and we have like a little bit of research in the much later life, and we have nothing for the stretch in between, like about what it means. We have more about the gambler's brain or sports psychology than we do about parenthood and parental psychology and neurobiology. It's a void. So that's a big gap. I see a hand raised. Is that what you, Isha?
Yes, Isha, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Oh, yeah, no, you actually asked my question. Thank you so much. And I have just really loved this talk. I think it's just wonderful.
Thank you.
So where has this research and writing led you? Is there a new topic you're interested in right now?
Yeah, so I write a newsletter called Between Us on Substack, and I just kind of write off of what I've learned and what I'm still learning. I'm really interested in writing about mental health more in other ways. Also, where has it led me? I guess I'll say two things. One, there's like a really incredible community of mostly women and some men doing advocacy work around this issue around maternal health and mental health. And so it's one thing is that it's led me to connect with all of them, which is amazing, to be part of that effort more directly. It's also changed me as a parent in a big way. One thing I'll say is I talked a little bit about like the notion of like prediction, that one of the goals of these changes, one of the outcomes of these changes is that you get better at predicting your child's needs. Prediction models like rely on mistakes. Like, that's actually how you get better. And so it's really helped me to like understand the process that I'm going through as a parent, as my kids get older and have different kinds of challenges, and to understand that like mistakes are actually part of it. Like far from like you're supposed, mother knows all, like you don't, and you're not supposed to. And by not knowing all, that's how you do it. Like, there's no other way. And it's really nice to feel that in the science as well.
If you're starting to work, or maybe you are already starting to work on the second edition of the book, it's been 4 years since?
Two-ish or a year and a
Two-ish,
half,
so-
yeah.
Has there been any changes in those 2 years that you would
Yes.
update?
There have been, so the one that like comes to mind most clearly is around fathers. So I mentioned that changed the longitudinal study that followed mothers from before pregnancy to 6 years after. Well, some of those same researchers are also following fathers. And what they found now, this was just published last year, is a very similar change in the theory of mind, the structure of the theory of mind network. So anatomical changes that they can document over time from pregnancy, from before pregnancy or the early part of pregnancy to the postpartum period. And it's just very kind of neat evidence for the fact that it's not just about pregnancy. Pregnancy is like an incredibly powerful physiological experience. And I will never say that like it's the same, but it is similar. It's very similar with similar outcomes, just different mechanisms along the way. So I'm really excited to see where that work goes. Yeah.
Where do you see the role of pediatricians in their ability to offer observations of moms and babies?
I love that question, and it's not one I ever get, but I have a lot to say about it because I mean, for one thing, my pediatrician did more for my own mental health, than my OBGYN, which is not a knock on her, just because you see them, you see them. And there is like a movement among pediatricians to do more there, to ask the parents more questions about themselves and their own mental health, and to provide them with resources where they can. I'm pretty sure in Maine, a lot of pediatricians are linked in with like a network of mental health providers to make referrals easier. I think that's really important, and I'm trying to decide whether to tell a story, which is, I met T. Barry Brazelton, very famous pediatrician. So he, for those who may not know him, he had a super popular TV show and a newspaper column, and he was one of these pediatricians who broke from the kind of the line and turning to mothers in particular and saying, trust yourself. And I think that was Spock's line, but like the same idea, the idea that like you should follow your own intuition and you have the answers, and how can we help you figure them out? So when I was struggling, I had a stack of old books, and one of them was Brazelton's, and I found this line in it. And of course, I'm not going to remember it exactly now, but it was about how the psychological upheaval in new motherhood is normal, and it may be the very thing that shapes you into the mother your child needs to be. And I really like clung on to that line because he just didn't see it anywhere else. And I called him, Dr. Brazelton, who was 98, I think, 92. I haven't told this story in a while, at the time, and we met for lunch and in Concord, Massachusetts, and it was sort of everything I hoped it would be, and until it wasn't. Like he was this incredibly warm, embracing kind of guy with his language. I felt like I was in therapy, you know, he sort of gave me all of the reassurances I needed, and I had started thinking about the science. And I said to him, like, as our lunch was coming to a close, I said, don't you think we should be talking to mothers, expectant mothers, about their brains and helping them to understand this process that they're going to go through before they're in it? And he said, well, I think that would scare them. Which, you know, it's okay. He's not wrong, right? Like it is a scary thought, and it's very much of his day, of his generation. And so I think, I will say it's also not so far off from the opinions of a lot of OBGYNs right now. They say, we have nothing, this information is great, but there's nothing we can do with it. There's no test or treatment that we can give people to tell them what is happening to their brain or how to change it, or so, and it's kind of a quagmire. And if we talk to them about their brains, we might not have time for something else. There's so much to do in that prenatal period. So it's not so different. I just think we have learned to trust women with information about their bodies and about childbirth and about so much, and we deserve information about how our brains are changing and going through this powerful stage of development. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.